Hi, I'm David Beas, Life Marketing Consultant with Cavalier Associates. I'm sitting with JT Bell, Annexus. JT, I've had the pleasure of working with you for over a decade
Yeah.
now. But for those who don't know what Annexus is, why don't you break that down for us?
Yeah, it's interesting because we're not a carrier, we're not a BGA. We do product development, which is what most people know us for. But then we also have distribution. So a reason why carriers partner with us is our relationships and distribution. And then our last kind of leg of the stool is our strategic partnerships with our index innovation side. So we'll partner with big name firms that we'll touch on here in a little bit. But those are the three cornerstones of who Annexus are. And at the end of the day, we're built for helping meet or exceed expectations of our advisors out there in the field, and at the end of the day delivering consumer value. And that's kind of cliche, but we've been very successful delivering on that mantra and that goal.
So let's break that apart. So first, from a distribution standpoint, you are not available to everybody.
Yeah, a kind of a catchphrase that's a little bit of a moving target is that, if we go to an advisor that does have access in our distribution, we say, hey, Bill or whatever, 94% of your competition can't sell our product. Meaning there's about 1 million advisors out there in the country that hold an insurance license. And of that, we have 50 to 60, 70,000 in that range at any given moment. So you kind of crunch the numbers, and there's that exclusivity is a real big part that goes back 16, 17 years to our fixed indexed annuity side. But, as marketers, wholesalers, people in the sales world, to be able to go to our consumers and say, or those advisors and say, you have something uniquely different that you're not going to get backdoored by another advisor, or certainly less likely to be backdoored. And they may have the shelf product for a carrier we work with, but they don't have the uniqueness of what we added or built for that product. So the exclusivity is a big deal that I think, frankly, doesn't get talked about enough.
Yeah, no, it's been a huge assistance for us. Obviously, I've known Annexus for a long time, specifically on the annuity side, and I think that's where a lot of people would probably have some name recognition with Annexus. You have a little bit more, let's call it a wider product berth on
Yeah.
the annuity side from a carrier selection process. But on the life insurance side, it has historically been a small portfolio. That portfolio has expanded a little bit. You have two partners on the accumulation side, one partner on the protection side. What what's a driving factor for the carriers that Annexus chooses to partner with? And I ask the question that way because I think a lot of carriers would actually want to partner with Annexus, but you're very selective in who you partner with. What drives that?
Yeah, from our side, we look for certain characteristics of a carrier partner. We've historically partnered with mutual companies, and you can say take that with somewhat of a grain of salt, but we believe in standing by the consumer, delivering true value, and sometimes with foreign-owned subsidiaries or stock companies, it can get a little more difficult or a little more convoluted, not necessarily in a bad way, but to date we've had two strong mutual carriers that we partnered with, and then our most recent addition, John Hancock. While they're a behemoth, we like to think that while they are a stock company, they behave with a lot of characteristics that typically mutual companies do. One of those being their integrity on their caps and not going to a new money, old money portfolio. There's strengths and weaknesses of every carrier out there, but that's one of the things we liked with Hancock in particular.
Hancock's a leader in the protection side, has been for as long as I've been in the business, which is over 15 years. You've been in for
almost 20.
20, and your dad, what are they?
It's in my blood.
A founder of the industry,
Yeah,
you might say.
yeah.
So Hancock, obvious choice on the protection side. Who do you partner with on the accumulation side?
Yeah, on the Cume side, we launched with Securian, was our very first carrier. Some relevance to that we may get into today is having a what we call smart beta, volatility control, manage volatility, or other similar names. But we launched our Prism account with Securian, of course, a mutual company. We're entering our 8th calendar year. So having live data is a huge thing in the industry right now. I think you would appreciate that. There's so many indexes that were created and overlaid. Well, they only launched 16 months ago, but all of a sudden they have 40 years of overlay data. And that's kind of a necessary evil in the business. The carriers have to kind of put something in the illustration. We do it too. But my point is, when we launched Securian, we have live data that's powerful. And then our next carrier on the life side, on the accumulation side, was with Nationwide. And where that really took shape was from our FIA distribution. And I think we're up to 30 or 40 billion dollars of annuity business just with Nationwide. So huge numbers that anybody should be proud of, and that naturally segued into a whole different product than the traditional shelf product that's available to the market. Again, Nationwide, another strong mutual carrier. We love the name recognition. That goes a long way. That you don't always get with insurance carriers, as you know. So, those were the other two that we joined forces with.
I mean, I've enjoyed a long relationship with Securian. Nationwide, though, has been extremely popular, obviously brand recognition wise. I don't think there's a lesser known.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say I don't think there's a more known insurance
Correct.
company in the country than Nationwide, and they've obviously built a lot of tools to facilitate the purchasing of an Annexus based accumulation. With that said, you had brought up, you've created a lot of smart beta designs, or let's call them what I think the majority of the industry will recognize as volatility control indices or indexes. We've seen this across the board. Almost every carrier, let's say 6 years ago, maybe 4 to 6 years ago, has introduced some type of volatility control index. What's the advantage in having some of these volatility control indexes, just from maybe an industry-wide, and then we'll drill down as it relates to Annexus?
Yeah, I think industry-wide, where they were kind of born was in a tough interest rate environment for capped S&P, and carriers and innovators like ourselves included had to think, how can we kind of push the envelope to drive consumer value? And so I think that was kind of how they were born. And now that we're past being in infancy, groups like ourselves have been able to really sharpen the tip of the spear and get real creative and real innovative on those VCI indexes. But again, I think the moral of the story, and certainly a mantra of what we believe in, is uncapped potential. And I've benefited. I've been a policyholder personally for all of our products that we've launched. And, with my Securian product, just the power of uncapped. And there's a unique S&P, which, is a lot of top of mind for people. But I achieved nearly a 90%, it was actually 86% return in a 2-year period. Going back to the question on VCIs, just uncapped potential. That example was with an S&P. I was also allocated to our smart beta, and I've achieved double-digit growth that you can't get in a capped account when the caps were 9.5. Now they're creeping up to 10. But uncapped potential is really what drove it.
And not that this video is legally managed, but obviously past performance does not dictate future performance.
Fair.
But there's the one disclaimer I'll give for today. But that said, when we talk about volatility control indexes, there's an argument to say that, well, in a bull market I want to be in the S&P, and in a bear market I want to be in a volatility control index. Do you agree or disagree with that?
It's funny when you say bull market or bear market, I would come back and say, well, which market, or how do we define market? If we're talking equities, then no doubt. If you're in a bull equities market, but then we have to introduce that cap notion again. And, in the outside world, when there aren't caps and aren't floors, that's a different argument. But we can be in a bullish equities market, but if our cap is 9, 10, 11, 11.5%, and maybe I'm in a mediocre VCI market, but no cap, it's interesting to compare those two. But Annexus, we're huge believers in diversification, and some people will cast shade at VCIs for not having enough equity exposure. And what we recommend is you, Mr. Advisor, Mr. Client, have the ability to make your own equity exposure within a VCI. So do 20% pure equities. Granted, it may have a cap, or carriers have uncapped, but then do 80% or 60 or 40, whatever you're comfortable with in the VCI to capture that uncapped huge growth potential that exists there.
Well, and I think there's an argument, I appreciate you going through that, but I think there's an argument to say, life insurance is a long-term investment. It's not something that you check on your Fidelity or your Charles Schwab, app every day. It's something that you're looking at growth over the course of 20 years or 15 years or longer, really, right? And so when you think about that, to your point, having, you're not always going to be in a bull, you're not always going to be in a bear. And so maybe having some exposure on both sides of those is to your point, an advantage and not a disadvantage.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, You did talk about, how one of the big things, one of the big questions we get asked a lot from different advisors is, how do you choose how to allocate? Most carriers just, they kind of point you into this S&P 500. Most people that design insurance policies, right, on the general agency side or on the, agent advisor side, really just kind of go, okay, well, 100% in the S&P. You or Annexus, I should say, has really kind of designed a way, an allocation structure. You tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, again, I mentioned diversification, and it goes back to your previous question about what's hot right now is the equities market. But here we are. There's people. There was a CNBC post on social media talking about what the S&P, the pure equities, looks like on a go forward basis, and no one has the crystal ball, but they were projecting modest growth. So growth, but more reasonable than what we've seen. So my point is they don't always track equities and VCIs and either or. So again, we like really pushing them together. And what we did was we teamed up with a third-party due diligence firm called the Index Standard, and smarter guys than you and I and probably everyone on this call. But what they do is they look at the underlying holdings that create all these indices, and they're non-biased. They look at the full spectrum for the 55 or whatever it is mainstream IUL carriers, and they look at the underpinnings of those, and not just on a backcasting, but on a look forward basis. So they'll look at indicators, Wall Street indicators, forecast modeling, forward rates, and actually make intuitive decisions. And they'll come back with what looks like a very simple 28%, 36%, 42%, whatever, a pie chart. But we've been able to use that to help our advisors give some direction to their clients, because it's a tough situation for you and I, even for a carrier RVP. We have to be careful on making a recommendation, which we've been able to rely on someone with data to at least guide us, and then the advisor maybe can peel back, but at least it's a quantifiable starting point, not just, oh, I think a third sounds good.
That's a really fair point, and I know that I've started using that index standard in just the designing, and to your point, it's a starting point. It's not an actual decision, and it's not for the life of the policy. I mean, the key to these is the ability to move in and out of various allocation sets. Now, one advantage I've noticed, talked about regularly as it relates to the smart beta or the volatility control indexes that Annexus is built is you can type them into a stock symbol and it comes up.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about the advantage of being able to show a client in real time what something looks like. It's not, oh, is it dividends included, is it not? But it's real time.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think a lot of advisors, I guess doing a disservice is harsh or maybe out of school, but I think what they value as simplicity, which sometimes is making the sale, is different than what may be best for the client. And when I say simple, the transparency that exists, which is what your question was with the S&P, leads advisors to recommend that. But to your point, what we've done a good job of is having public-facing ticker symbols and ability to quote that we're not directly involved in. I mean, someone could stumble on Google and find it, but very traditional trailing 12 months, year to date, quarter to date, month to date, and then going back 3, 5, 10 years, where we can pull up a real data point in real time, like it would on your Schwab account or Yahoo Finance or whatever, and you can mouse over your segment start date. So maybe you get that annual statement, you say, oh, I started my segment on February 15th of 2024. You can mouse over, very user-friendly. And again, I think it's kind of unique and good that it's not on a big branded carrier website. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like raw data. Now, the only bad news is you have to know your par rate and kind of calculate the number, but some people kind of mentally get into it more, clients, meaning they get engaged like they would with their Schwab account, and they start checking it every day, and it's a pretty cool feeling. So we've endorsed and embraced that and help our end users navigate and find that data out there.
Well, I mean, when you can add that to your stock app, I mean, that's a beneficial thing.
Yeah.
Now, I want to point this out is, you may have the IUL buyer, right, or consumer, I should say, that is just kind of a set it and forget it type. Mm-hmm. And okay, this works for them. There's an allocation guide. You still have a standard S&P account on these products, but for the more engaged investor, that's really where the power of transparency comes through.
Yeah. I mean, I think transparency can be good for a very analytical, sophisticated client. We live and die by larger cases. I think both you and I in my past life, your current life. But where I'm going with that is you get sophisticated buyers and clients, and of course the advisors that tend to play in that space. So transparency can be important for those sophisticated clients in many respects, and then also just at your more bread and butter sale, I think transparency is good, and being clear on where the index stands and what it's comprised of.
I'm going to dive a little deeper here. You spoke briefly with regards to Securi and the Prism Index there. Nationwide has two indexes that are very, very popular. One is the Zebra Edge Index, and then the other one is new, and that's the Goldman Sachs New Horizon.
Yes.
Tell us about those two indexes.
Yeah, so, we have our Zebra and Mosaic were the two that we launched with. We have a close relationship with Roger Ibbotson. I have the pleasure of, just having dinner right next to, one of the godfathers of Wall Street, which was really cool. But we go pretty deep with our strategic partners like that. And Zebra is Roger's firm. So we worked very closely with him to develop that. We won't get too deep into the weeds, but think of carving out a couple hundred key stocks that we call the smart S&P 500 or 200 or 300. It's not necessarily the hottest, high-flying, best performing, but it's the smarter S&P allocation. That's Zebra. When we have Mosaic, the simplest explanation is a little more global flair to capture diversification. And then what you touched on, our newest offering with Goldman Sachs. I'll touch on the two differentiators, one being intraday trading, because Goldman Sachs, as you guessed it, Goldman Sachs, they have a lot of horsepower and trading potential where we can capture intraday trades and help our overall yield with that index. The other thing is they introduced a credit sleeve, which has been getting a lot of attention in the alt world and guys that manage money, RIAs, et cetera. So there's an alt sleeve, a credit sleeve, and then intraday trading. But most importantly, what we're excited about is there's a high par 5 component to that index. And what that does is we looked at the industry, and Annexus has been proud to plug gaps or holes in the industry. And one of the pain that our advisors were feeling were cap rates coming down and having a tough conversation with the client. So we kind of looked internally and said, hey, what can we do about that? How can we innovate? And what we came out with was tied only to the Goldman Sachs index, the ability to guarantee contractually a 5-year participation rate each time premiums are paid. And it's not what most people think as a 5-year point to point. It is a 1-year point to point. It is no buy-up, no fee, no spread. And it is frankly the highest no buy-up participation rate. So it's not a cut rate participation rate that we're locking in. And the end result is knowing with conviction, at least on that portion of the allocation, you can go to your client and say, this will not change. And I always say, if it avoids one sticky conversation with your biggest client, Mr. Advisor, we've done our job. If we helped mitigate one of those tough conversations, that's a big deal.
In-force illustrations on those and challenging, and not to mention, and I'm going to go all the way back to your first thing, saying, working with or partnering with good distribution, not good distribution partners, but good insurance companies.
Correct, yeah.
I've looked at some of those global policies, and the caps have just, they're at 7.5, 7, 6.75. There's some other carriers we're seeing that are even lower than that. The Global Atlantic, for example, is I want to say down into the 4.5 at this point.
Wow. Yeah.
The index just don't work that way. So, it's not just a spreadsheet sale. It truly is partnering with good insurance companies that have a track record of maintaining caps.
And one thing that's interesting, you would think some other carrier could have brought this innovation, but it took us partnering with Nationwide to bring this to market. There on the annuity side, there's a couple carriers that can lock a cap rate, but on our side of the world, to lock a participation rate, there's nobody in the entire industry that have done this. And who knows what the future holds, but our distribution, which is that limited distribution, has access to this. And the other 94% of the advisors that sell nationwide, and I'm using that kind of tongue-in-cheek, but don't have access to the high par 5. They can sell a strong accumulation-focused IUL, but that last component is only available in our distribution and nowhere else in the entire industry.
Well, and Nationwide, I mean, I've spent some time with their the CEO of their life division, and the amount that they hold in reserves is double what the required minimum is. I mean, they're a very, very conservative company. They would agree with that statement over and
Yeah.
over again. And but that's no different than, say, a Securian who's obviously never come up for sale, a Nationwide that doesn't come up for sale, and a John Hancock, again, that a multinational company,
Yeah.
really, and again, one that is aggressive in their underwriting but conservative in their product design.
Yeah.
So a good balance with them. So as I pull us back out of the weeds here, I utilize your website all the time with advisors, and I think the advantage there is it allows the advisor the ability to communicate some of these very, very in-depth conversations, some of these very detailed indexes to the client. Tell us a little bit about your website.
Yeah, no, it's huge. I mean, we've put a ton of energy, time, and of course money into developing that. And it's myannexus.com, and you have to be approved to register, of course. But once you're in there, it's kind of one-stop shopping, But more importantly is what's on there. And, I've worked with carriers as long as you have, and we both could laugh that, their marketing department or their materials sometimes aren't the greatest. I'll leave it at that. But what we've done is we've brought all of that in-house where we create our brochures. And of course, it has to go through the compliance because it has the carrier logo, but it's our brain power that we're bringing in. And those are the things that we put that you've used on my Annexus. And, on the life side, to be able to access Nationwide, Securian, and Hancock on a single sign-on, like just the time factor and the convenience, it's all right there. Consumer guide. Someone wants to go deep, someone wants to go shallow. We have a 1-pager or a 12-pager. Just very nimble of what we can do that way, and controlling the marketing material to really move the needle.
Well, and if it's gone through carrier compliance, getting it through a broker-dealer it's pretty simple.
Yeah, I think you'd have a very good position, good expedient time of getting that approved. Yeah, so.
And if you want access to the myannexus website, just go ahead and send us a message, reach out to us, and we'll make sure that we plug you in so you're able to access the marketing material, the guides, the videos.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an extensive catalog. I think you undersold it. I mean, it truly is an extensive catalog, both for the advisor from an education standpoint, right, but also to the client for a communication standpoint.
Yeah, for materials, etc. Another thing too, we make it easy to run illustrations, to start an e-app. So literally one-stop shopping as an advisor or a marketer or wholesaler or RVP to facilitate getting an app, pulling the material, starting an app, running a quote, all of that in a single sign-on has been awesome.
And if an advisor wants to get in touch with you, learn more, they'd obviously reach out to us and do that. But you and your team, I just, John Elder's been a huge part of that as well. But talk, quickly just about the team that you have, kind of to back up or to support.
Yeah, and we're expanding. So we brought on Nathan Van Persum, who worked for me for a long time when I was running my VGA. A lot of experience. Was at, of course, one of our Nexus distribution IDCs, as we call them, or BGAs. So brought him on as another salesperson. You had mentioned John Elder. We also have 2 other individuals, Stephen Poppy and Al Sukerman, that help cover the territories. And then we also have another gentleman that does some specialty markets on that side. And then I kind of oversee the division as a whole. But I like to roll up my sleeves. So yeah, anybody listening, I'd love to get into the weeds or high level, whatever you want to do, and we can chat through David and hook us all up.
Well, JT, look, I really appreciate it. I know you're off to the next meeting. I have another meeting to go to, and then you're back on a plane. So
I am.
It's I appreciate you working through LA traffic. You've got a beautiful view here, so I really, again, I can't say it enough, but I do appreciate you sitting down and having this conversation with me. So if you want to learn more about Annexus, more about Capital Associates, what we do on the life insurance side, long-term care, disability, and annuity, to support advisors and effectively their clients across the country, don't hesitate to reach out. We look forward to speaking with you soon. Thank you again.
All right. Thank you, David.
Have a good one.
All right.